So anyways, here's my talk. I'll try to be under this time. About me, really quickly, my name is Mark Prosser. It's my first time speaking at NANOG, although I've been to 4 NANOGs now. I have 15 years experience, and if you look around this conference, that means I have no experience. I recently focused on network automation, especially in the network automation forum. I consider myself a network operator advocate, and this is a talk in the many series of talks I want to give on this, which basically I'm trying to think about socio-technical systems, which is representing the socio portions of the systems that we work on. I also consider myself a systems thinking enthusiast, which is working through the system. I'm an IP consulting engineer at Nokia, but someday I would like to be WIMP's executive assistant. That's my goal. I'm also the founder of TORNOG. We'll be having our second meetup next month, November 12th. So by the time you're seeing this on YouTube, it'll probably be too late, but something might come in the future. So feel free to add me on LinkedIn and ask about it. So I'd like to yield 1 minute of my 10-minute talk for this thing is that I very much believe strongly that Canada needs NOGs. Throughout USA, with the US NUA, throughout Baltic NOG, and so many places throughout Europe, NOGs are popping up like crazy. But in Canada, we have none. We have TORNOG, Montreal NOG, and I would love to get more from coast to coast to coast, and that includes the Arctic coast. So if you want to have a NOG in the Northwest Territories, I will come there, at least. And maybe the 7 of us can have a pizza and maybe do some glamping under the Northern Lights. So please do reach out to me if you want to do it, and I can help you get started. So, on to the topic, on CLIs. So this talk is really coming from a NANOG thread that I started. It was received. I don't know if you would say if it was well received. There was definitely some strong opinions where I polled the same questions. Basically, do you like CLIs? Do you hate CLIs? Do you think they should go away? Do you think we should transform them? In the NANOG community, they were very pro CLI. In the network automation forum, they were very mixed. In the packet pushers community, it was 50-50 kind of thing. More so like strongly for and strongly against. But in my opinion, CLIs won't go away because customers are always right, especially in matters of taste. But a quick poll in the room, hands, who loves a CLI? Okay, who thinks the CLI should go away and you hate it? Oh, I see Steve. Well, great, I'm here to annoy you both. So anyways, in that thread, I abstained from forming an opinion. I really wanted to understand how people feel about it before I render something and get a true thing. But I think that there's a middle ground that we're kind of missing here, which is basically there's limitations of CLIs. There's definitely limitations to platforms and network automation. And perhaps with some elbow grease and some creative thinking, we can kind of get to the next stage. So the pros of CLI, this is something that everybody can probably experience. It runs on a toaster. You could probably use an ESP32 and MicroPython to implement in a CLI, and then pull from any API from anywhere and try to give reasonable data. It also has a powerful query and pattern matching language. We can use grep statements, match statements, includes, regular expressions, and try to transform that data into insight quickly. It's also relatively universal. If you go from one company to another company, you probably start your query with a show command, but otherwise, you have the tab completion, the question marks, it's pretty intuitive. Also, the best thing is my favorite part is your client, your way. If you like iTerm2, if you like secure CRT, if you like PuTTY, doesn't really matter. It works everywhere. It's pretty reasonable, and somewhere, someday, someone's going to create a Rust client, and it's going to solve all of operations forever. The other thing that Russ White said to me when I was on his podcast is that CLIs are information rich, which we can do a very small query and get a lot of information very quickly. The other thing as well for vendors is easy to prototype with powerful transformations. They can create a feature tomorrow and have a CLI feature for it the day after. The cons of CLI, though, is that it's tightly coupled to devices, which means we can only really see what the device can see from its perspective of its daemons and its queries. Some 3 examples of that are the locally registered data. In that examples of that, it's like ACL counters, port counters. A long time ago, we decided to bring that to other systems, such as Grafana, LibreNMS, whatever. Like, long ago, we said it doesn't make sense to put it in CLI and log it to every device. There's locally transformed data, which means what you see on the device will not be true of the entire graph. This is their BGP tables. This is anything that has a policy, essentially. There's also distributed graph. This is the feature, the first-class citizen of CLIs. If you go to anywhere in the ISS graph, you can probably have a good idea of what's going on in the rest of the network. We also, the other thing about CLIs is we kind of forget that we rely on other tools to make them powerful. We look at Visio, we look at now Netbox. You're kind of using GUIs elsewhere to give context to random IP addresses for just anonymous tokens. And the also ability is that there's very limited ability to document, and as I put this little meme here, basically interface descriptions really is the only thing we can do to give context to our data. The disbenefits of CLI alternatives, however, is that trying to move from a random DSL to a markup language is also DSL in the case of Ansible, it hasn't been well received. So it's like we're saying, like, what are we really trying to achieve here? The other thing as well is every vendor will come to you and say that, hey, I have a single pane of glass for you. What ends up happening is you have about 10 tabs and many panes of glass. The other thing as well is when you move between organizations, if you work with a bespoke tool at one organization, that's completely useless at another organization. The operations, as I said here, is highly imperative. You click, 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 put a form. Some person uses a star for a wildcard. Another person uses a percentage sign. No one can really figure it out, but anyway. And the worst thing as well is that unlike the CLI portions, that the clients is getting worse as time goes on. Every single browser essentially is Chrome in a trench coat, or Firefox, which basically almost died when Google stopped paying them nearly. As well as browsers are heavy. I mean, to just do the same operations that we're kind of doing in CLIs, we're basically using maybe 20 gigs, 30 gigs of RAM in some cases for all these browser tabs that we have. And as well as the CVEs. If CLIs or GUIs are supposed to make our life easier, why they keep introducing vulnerabilities into our environments? So the other thing I would like to mention is that it has heavy context for our brains. My wife and I were moving an apartment recently, and I noticed how many stacks of textbooks that I had. So doing the CLI commands is one thing, but think about all the context that we put in our brain. The other thing to consider is that my wife has to write a shopping list for me like this just to remember what I'm going to get from the grocery store. So I don't know how these two people could be the same, but I'm supposed to have so much information about segment routing in my brain, but I can't remember if I need bread or not when I get to the grocery store. So I'll use the last few minutes to talk about what we can do. So the Network Automation Forum recently published an open source framework, which is basically the NAF framework for network automation. And I was very persistent in pestering people like Wim to saying that a presentation layer should also be acceptable to be done in the CLI. So basically you can put the CLI as a very human, friendly, usable interface to abstract or present all the data that's part of a complex system behind it. This means, like, you can basically say, like, I put all of my really tough stuff into Netbox. I did all the work, but it's going to be represented in the CLI, and we can make it look like how our operators want it to look like. So how can we actually do this? Well, as I said, you probably have a bunch of platforms that have all this disparate data that many different teams have worked hard to wrangle and normalize and transform. But how do you bring this all together? Wim recently brought out a draft to the IETF, who's basically trying to use a graph index as a meta API to bring all this data together and make context for it. The tools that this will probably be presented to, because I kind of came to the same conclusion, is via KubeNet. It's not actually KubeNet itself, it's under the KubeNet umbrella, and Wim will probably announce it eventually, but also InfraHub, which means you can actually get support for it. They came to the same conclusion by using Neo4j as a graph database. That means you can take something like an IP address and say, what is an IP address in my network? An IP address to someone, like for example, the IP address 10.10.50.1, might be useless in one network. It might be hypercritical in another network. So you can then expand that out to things like this correlates to an interface correlates to a service. So if someone's complaining about an IP address, what does that mean in the context of information? And this is perhaps not the best example of it, but it can go many different ways. We're talking about the transformation of a policy. How does that correlate back to the interface? How does the policy correlate to the device? If you make, let's say if you did a show command and said, I want to see all the changes for this service, if the meta API is abstracting that away for you, you can say, well, the Itential made these service changes, Ansible Tower made these changes, and then somebody who shouldn't have done it went and copy-pasted these changes into the device and changed the context of the service. But I think that's kind of the place that we're going to go eventually, and I guess we'll see what happens, but it does require a lot of elbow grease. So the context of what I'm trying to say, as this is called the Cattledog method, is that people love to argue with like pets versus cattle. And in my opinion, there's a third option. There's something called a Cattledog. You can feed it ice cream, you can give it a name, you can give it a special prompt, you can make it look however you like, but it's also going to herd the cattle, which in this case is not the network devices and the systems themselves. It's the data, it's the services, it's the context of your business logic that you're going to be hurting. So anyways, I'm 50 seconds under, so I just paid back his time.